Part 3, Chapter 2 of The Man of Property. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information, or to find out how you can volunteer, please go to LibriVox.org. Recording by Andy Minter. The Forsyte Saga. The Man of Property, by John Galsworthy. Part 3, Chapter 2, Night in the Park. Although, with her infallible instinct, Mrs. Small had said the very thing to make her guest more intrigué than ever, it is difficult to see how else she could truthfully have spoken. It was not a subject which the Forsytes could talk about even among themselves. To use the word Soames had invented to characterize to himself the situation, it was subterranean. Yet within a week of Mrs. MacAnder's encounter in Richmond Park, to all of them, save Timothy, from whom it was carefully kept, to James on his domestic beat from the Poultry to Park Lane, to George, the wild one, on his daily adventure from the bow window at the Haversnake to the billiard-room at the Red Pottle, was it known that those two had gone to extremes. George, it was he who invented many of those striking expressions still current in fashionable circles, voiced the sentiment more accurately than anyone when he said to his brother Eustace that the Buccaneer was going it. He expected Soames was about fed up. It was felt that he must be, and yet what could be done? He ought perhaps to take steps, but to take steps would be deplorable. Without an open scandal, which they could not see their way to recommending, it was difficult to see what steps could be taken. In this impasse, the only thing was to say nothing to Soames, and nothing to each other. In fact, to pass it over. By displaying towards Irene a dignified coldness, some impression might be made upon her, but she was seldom now to be seen, and there seemed a slight difficulty in seeking her out on purpose to show her coldness. Sometimes, in the privacy of his bedroom, James would reveal to Emily the real suffering that his son's misfortune caused him. "I can't tell," he would say. "It worries me out of my life. There'll be a scandal, and that'll do him no good. I shan't say anything to him. There might be nothing in it. What do you think? She's very artistic, they tell me." "What? Oh, you're a regular Julie. Well, I don't know. I expect the worst. This is what comes of having no children. I knew it would be from the first. They never told me they didn't mean to have any children. Nobody tells me anything." On his knees by the side of the bed, his eyes open and fixed with worry, he would breathe into the counterpane. Clad in his nightshirt, his neck poked forward, his back rounded, he resembled some long white bird. "Our Father," he repeated, turning over and over again the thought of this possible scandal. Like old Jolyon, he too, at the bottom of his heart, set the blame of the tragedy down to family interference. What business had that lot? He began to think of the Stanhope Gate branch, including young Jolyon and his daughter, as "that lot," to introduce a person like this Bosinney into the family. He had heard George's sobriquet, the Buccaneer, but he could make nothing of that. The young man was an architect. He began to feel that his brother Jolyon, to whom he had always looked up, and on whose opinion he had relied, was not quite what he had expected. Not having his eldest brother's force of character, he was more sad than angry. His great comfort was to go to Winifred's, and take the little Darties in his carriage over to Kensington Gardens, and there, by the round pond, he could be often seen walking, with his eyes fixed anxiously on little Publius Dartie's sailing boat, which he himself had freighted with a penny, as though convinced that it would never again come to shore; while little Publius, who, James delighted to say, was not a bit like his father, skipping along under his lee, would try to get him to bet another that it never would, having found that it always did. And James would make the bet; he always paid, sometimes as many as 3 or 4 pennies in an afternoon, for the game seemed never to pall on little Publius, and always in paying he said, "Now that's for your money box. Why, you're getting quite a rich man." The thought of his little grandson's growing wealth was a real pleasure to him. But little Publius knew a sweet shop, and a trick worth two of that. And they would walk home across the park, James's figure, with high shoulders and absorbed and worried face, exercising its tall, lean protectorship, pathetically unregarded, over the robust child figures of Imogen and little Publius. But those gardens and that park were not sacred to James. Forsytes and tramps, children and lovers, rested and wandered, day after day, night after night, seeking one and all some freedom from labour, from the reek and turmoil of the streets. The leaves browned slowly, lingering with the sun and summer-like warmth of the nights. On Saturday, October the 5th, the sky, that had been blue all day, deepened after sunset to the bloom of purple grapes. There was no moon, and a clear dark, like some velvety garment, was wrapped around the trees, whose thin branches, resembling plumes, stirred not in the still, warm air. All London had poured into the park, draining the cup of summer to its dregs. Couple after couple, from every gate, they streamed along the paths and over the burnt grass, and one after another, silently, out of the lighted spaces, stole into the shelter of the feathery trees, where, blotted against some trunk or under the shadow of shrubs, they were lost to all but themselves in the heart of the soft darkness. To fresh comers along the paths, these forerunners formed but part of that passionate dusk, whence only a strange murmur, like the confused beating of hearts, came forth. But when that murmur reached each couple in the lamplight, their voices wavered and ceased, their arms enlaced, their eyes began seeking, searching, probing the blackness. Suddenly, as though drawn by invisible hands, they too stepped over the railing, and silent as shadows were gone from the light. The stillness, enclosed in the far inexorable roar of the town, was alive with the myriad passions, hopes, and loves of multitudes of struggling human atoms. For, in spite of the disapproval of that great body of Forsytes, the Municipal Council, to whom love had long been considered, next to the sewage question, the gravest danger to the community, a process was going on that night in the park, and in 100 other parks, without which the 1,000 factories, churches, shops, taxis, and drains, of which they were the custodians, were as arteries without blood, a man without a heart. The instincts of self-forgetfulness, of passion and of love hiding under the trees, away from the trustees of their remorseless enemy, the sense of property, were holding a stealthy revel, and Soames, returning from Bayswater, for he had been alone to dine at Timothy's, walking home along the water, with his mind upon that coming lawsuit, had the blood driven from his heart by a low laugh and the sound of kisses. He thought of writing to the Times the next morning, to draw the attention of the editor to the condition of our parks. He did not, however, for he had a horror of seeing his name in print. But, starved as he was, the whispered sounds in the stillness, the half-seen forms in the dark, acted on him like some morbid stimulant. He left the path along the water, and stole under the trees, along the deep shadow of little plantations, where the boughs of chestnut trees hung their great leaves low, and there was a blacker refuge, shaping his course in circles which had for their object a stealthy inspection of chairs side by side against tree trunks, of enlaced lovers who stirred at his approach. Now he stood still on the rise overlooking the Serpentine, where, in full lamplight, black against the silver water, sat a couple who never moved, the woman's face buried on the man's neck, a single form, like a carved emblem of passion, silent and unashamed. And, stung by the sight, Soames hurried on, deeper into the shadow of the trees. In this search who knows what he thought and what he sought? Bread for hunger, light in darkness? Who knows what he expected to find? Impersonal knowledge of the human heart? the end of his private subterranean tragedy? For again, who knew but that each dark couple, unnamed, unnameable, might not be he and she? But it could not be such knowledge as this that he was seeking. The wife of Soames Forsyte sitting in the park like a common wench! Such thoughts were inconceivable, and from tree to tree, with his noiseless step, he passed. Once he was sworn at. Once the whisper, "If only it could always be like this," sent the blood flying again from his heart, and he waited there, patient and dogged, for the two to move. But it was only a poor thin slip of a shop girl in her draggled blouse, who passed him, clinging to her lover's arm. 100 other lovers, too, whispered that hope in the stillness of the trees. 100 other lovers clung to each other. But, shaking himself with sudden disgust, Soames returned to the path, and left that seeking for what he knew not what. End of Part 3, Chapter 2.